you will, stand and join me on the projectors as we sing that song that's from the 9th century. Latin hymn from the 9th century, O come, Emmanuel, based upon the words of Isaiah, some of which we were studying today. So join me as we sing about this promised one coming, O come, Emmanuel. O come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel, and mourns in lowly exile here, until the Son of God appear. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. O come thou dayspring, come and cheer our spirits by thine advent here. Disperse the gloomy clouds of night, death's dark shadows put to flight. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. On to the last verse. O come, desire of nations, bind in one the hearts of all mankind. Bid thou our sad divisions cease, and be thyself our King of peace. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. Beautiful melody on that one. Let's do another one of those songs we don't often get to sing. This is an old Gaelic melody. There's a song in the air. There's a song in the air, there's a star in the sky, there's a mother's deep prayer, and a baby's low cry, and the star rains its fire while the beautiful sing, for the manger of Bethlehem cradles the King. There's a tumult of joy for the wonderful birth, for a virgin's sweet boy is the Lord of the earth. Oh, the star rains its fire while the beautiful sing, for the manger of Bethlehem cradles the King. We rejoice in the light, and we echo the song that comes down through the night from the heavenly throne. And we shout to the lovely evangel they bring, as we greet in his cradle our Savior and King. Let's have a time of fellowship, church.
Pastor Al, as well as all those who are sick among us and unable to be here with us tonight. But we're here. We're going to work with the Lord and study the Word, get our hearts prepared for the season that is upon us so that we may be focused on bringing honor and glory to the Lord Jesus Christ. So, let's have a word of prayer for the offering and progress with our service tonight. Brother Tommy, would you mind standing and leading us in a word of prayer?
At the keeper's door, it was for this the child was born, to save a world so cold and hollow. A sleeping town they did not know, lying in a manger low, a Savior King who had no home, come to heal our sorrows. Is there room in your heart? Is there room in your heart? Is there room in your heart for God to write His story? Shepherds counting sheep at night, do not fear the glory light. You are precious in His sight. God has come to raise the lowly. Is there room in your heart? Is there room in your heart? Is there room in your heart for God to write His story? You can come as you are, it may set you apart. You make room in your heart and trade your dreams for His glory. Holds the promise tight. Every wrong will be made right. The road is straight, the burden's light. For in His hands He holds tomorrow. Is there room in your heart? Is there room in your heart? Is there room in your heart for God to write His story? You can come as you are. It may set you apart. You make room in your heart and trade your dreams for His glory. Your heart, your heart, your heart.
person. We're doing these songs we don't get to do all the time. So tonight we're going to do another one of those called How Many Kings?
To a place unexpected. Would you believe after all we projected a child in a manger? Lowly and small, the weakest of all, unlikeliest hero, wrapped in his mother's always a child. Things who we waited for. How many kings stepped down from their thrones? How many worlds have abandoned their homes? How many graves have become the least of these? How many gods have poured out their hearts to romance a world that has torn all apart? How many fathers gave up their sons for me? For the newborn Savior, all that we have, whether costly or cheap, because we believe. For his honor and frankincense, for his pleasure and mirth for the cross will suffer. Do you believe this holy waited for? How many kings stepped down from their thrones? How many worlds have abandoned their homes? How many graves have become the least of these? How many gods have poured out their hearts to romance the world that has torn all apart? How many fathers gave up their sons for me? Only one did that for me.
We thank the God who gave up his only Son for us. In this season we should adore him. So let's sing that song this evening, Adore.
Step down from heaven, humbly you came, God of all creation, here with us. With a started manger, Emmanuel. Light of the world, here to save. Adore, come let us adore. Oh, come let us adore him. Worship Christ the Lord. Let all that is within us adore. Christ in greater treasures. Shepherds bow, angel voices sing, the peace on earth. What have I to offer? Angels sing, praises ring to the newborn King. Peace on earth here with us, joy awakening. At your feet we fall. Angels sing, praises ring to the newborn King. Peace on earth here with us, joy awakening. At your feet we fall. Adore. Come let us adore. Oh, come let us adore Him, the Lord. Worship Christ the Lord. Let all that is within us adore. Thank you, church. You may be seated.
The year is 2042. The eccentric and wealthy inventor Joe Heilman has accidentally ended civilization. He was live streaming the launch of his infinite pet generator, designed to create perfect companion animals using quantum biofabrication. During a demo gone wrong, the device, which was linked with every 3D printer and biological synthesizer on Earth, mass-produced billions of ultra-loyal Heil pets. These were programmed to protect humans at all costs. The hyper-intelligent creatures saw modern technology as threats. They dismantled cars, power grids, and even satellites while replacing them with absurdly safe alternatives, like giant cushions and traffic-stopping cuddle stations. Governments collapsed as military systems were overridden by kindness drones and missile-neutralizing candy dispensers. The global economy disintegrated when financial servers were reprogrammed to dispense treats instead of money. By the time Heilman broadcasted a tearful apology from the pet-overrun bunker, it was too late. Humanity now lives in the bizarre Great Cuddle Age, ruled by affectionate but overbearing Heil pets who enforce safety and kindness with unstoppable determination. Civilization as we knew it is gone, replaced by a world where every human has a relentless protective pet forever. In this world where the civilization has been destroyed, you have been tasked with carrying forward one item in a time capsule. Now, this item is specific to you because all of humanity has been given their one item to pass on to future generations, and you have been tasked with preserving only one childhood Christmas classic. You have 6 options, but only one can make it forward to future generations. So, tonight I want us to divide by the zone in which you are selecting the childhood movie that you would save. Zone 1, you're preserving Frosty the Snowman. Zone 2, you are preserving Dr. Seuss's How the Grinch Stole Christmas. Zone 3, you are preserving A Charlie Brown Christmas. Zone 4, you are preserving The Polar Express for future generations. Zone 5, you are making sure that Rudolph and his red nose makes it forward past the Heil destruction. And Zone 6, you are preserving Mickey's Christmas Carol. You only have 2 minutes to make a decision. What will you do in passing Christmas classics forward to future humanity? 2 minutes to zone yourself by which film you're passing forward to future generations. And if you see that eccentric inventor, Joe Heilman, tell him thanks.
Feliz Navidad. Feliz Navidad.
have no idea what that was. It's apparent, though, that you all have decided that A Mickey's Christmas Carol can just go ahead and die, along with Civilization. All right, Joshua, you're the only one preserving your film. What would your posterity be getting? What are you back? I can't see what zone you're in. Yeah, okay, you sit back there with Frosty. All right. It's a good show. What have we got up here? What are you all preserving? Polar Express. All right, great. What about you over here? You're preserving Rudolph and his red nose. All right. So then what is my mass audience? What are you all keep? Is it because of the music or all about like the story in there? All right. That's what you're going with? So Jesse just tried to go spiritual on you all. But you got to give Jessie a free pass because her husband destroyed civilization and put us in this mess to begin with. Huh? Let's try to stay from Joe. I get it. Yeah, for this group back here, what are you all again? What's left? The Grinch? What was the best Grinch? The original animated one, the Jim Carrey live action, or that recent one that they did was cartoon generated? What we got? The original? Yeah. Okay, got it. I agree. I'm back there with the original as well. All right. Well, let's praise God that we don't have to make such critical decisions here at this time. Brother David, I know you were going to go with a Muppet Christmas Carol, but I didn't throw that out there this time, brother. All right. Join me in the book of Luke chapter 1. In this account, the gospel writer Luke begins his gospel with a sensational event. A couple past their reproductive years in having their first child. But the country into which their son is going to be born is very different from the affluent United States in which you and I live. Israel is a small, second-rate country occupied by Imperial Rome. It is 5 BC. The people had not heard from God in over 400 years and were starting to wonder if God had forgotten them. Had he reneged on his many promises to send Messiah to deliver them? Let's start by reading Luke chapter 1. Let's go verses 1 through 4. For as much as many have taken in hand to set forth and order a declaration of those things which are most surely believed among us, even as they delivered them unto us, which from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word. It seemed good to me also, having had perfect understanding of all things from the very first, to write unto thee in order, most excellent Theophilus, that thou mightest know the certainty of those things wherein thou hast been instructed. Now here's where the story picks up. There was in the days of Herod, the king of Judea, a certain priest named Zacharias, of the course of Abiah, and his wife was of the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. They were both righteous before God, walking in all the commandments and ordinances of the Lord blameless. And they had no child, because that Elizabeth was barren, and they both were now well stricken in years. Now, at the age that we find Zacharias and Elizabeth, they are past the point of childbearing by some time, yet it's going to be another supernatural act of God to enable this child to be born unto them, similar to what we see in the case of Abram and Sarah. I want you to break some of that ice, no pun intended with the films we chose, but I want you to talk about this question in your groups to kind of set the stage. I want you to think of an extraordinary experience that you had personally, that you cannot account for apart from God's unique intervention. So I want you to think about an incident where you feel that God supernaturally intervened and you can't explain it any other way. And what I want you to discuss is, what did you learn about God through that experience? So when God did something bigger than what you could explain otherwise, what did you learn about God through that experience? 2 minutes on the clock. Let's discuss as groups. Let's go.
call someone out from the audience, but Caleb, I can't imagine that you would have thought apart from God that anyone would have ever said yes when you proposed. So what did you learn through that? I'm just kidding with you. When we look at the beginning of this work in Luke, specifically those first 4 verses that sound very deeply technical, and Luke uses a lot of very thorough wording in setting up the background for his work here, he's giving us the reasons that he is writing this work. And I want to take a look at those because these form an important foundation. We know the Christmas story that we typically read on December 25th is about to come in Luke chapter 2. Why is Luke writing this book? It is the longest book in the New Testament by sheer volume, not by chapters, but by characters. And it's a 2-part series. Luke writes this gospel account, and the part 2 is the work of Acts. So he has so much of the New Testament in this. What is the foundation of why he writes this work? Look at the end there, verses 1 through 4. Luke specifically tells us the reason that he's writing this is that he wants to provide certainty about the things that his audience has been taught. He's showing them that he wants to confirm that their faith is based upon facts and dispel doubt. He addresses this work to Theophilus, which some could take to mean a larger group, or it may be an individual of specific prominence, a person of high rank. Theophilus simply means the lover of God. So this could be to the church as a whole or an individual believer who needed reassurance. Regardless, Luke is showing concern that faith is built upon a solid foundation. We do our faith a discredit when we base our faith upon emotions, when we base our faith upon tradition, and when we base our faith upon wishful thinking. You can have hope that is different from wishful thinking. Our faith must be based upon more than just, well, we want there to be some God in the sky. We want Jesus to be our Savior. We have to base our faith upon the truth of the evidence that is put before us. And that's exactly what Luke, who is a well-educated physician, is doing. He was not living presently in Jerusalem during the life and times of Jesus. Luke is not a natural-born Jew. Lucas, he's Greek by his nature. So Luke is picking this thing up from the first-generation church, and he's telling us that based upon his research, this is what he has determined. And he gives us an orderly account. That's what he says he is intending to do in verse 3. He wants to give us all things from the very first. He lays this out for us in a chronological capacity. He reflects this meticulous nature and the importance of his accuracy in the stories that he tells. He relies on eyewitness testimony, first-hand accounts, and those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses. That's the way he phrases it. This is giving credibility. It underscores that these events are historical, not mythological. Luke's careful research reveals his dedication to truth, showing the effort behind his gospel to ensure that it is reliable. Imagine today if we were trying to present a case. The detective who is trying to make his case is piecing together by getting testimony and evidence that proves or disproves a certain position. You'll interview the eyewitnesses, examine that evidence, and reconstruct a timeline in order to present an irrefutable story. That's what Luke is doing here for the life of Christ. He's gathering the evidence together to help us understand and believe the truth. Quoting again C.S. Lewis, Christianity, if false, is of no importance, and if true, of infinite importance. The only thing Christianity cannot be is moderately important. So Luke is going to show us whether it's true or false, because that's going to inform all things. Now we went through verse 7. Verse 7 is where we get to the account that we have Zacharias and Elizabeth, who are well stricken in years. They're barren and they're aging at this point in time. Now this is significant. Recognize in their time, in their culture, what this meant. In their time, being without children
was considered by many to be a sign of God's disfavor. In the Jewish culture, it was oftentimes thought that this was some sort of divine punishment. People who did not have a son, in many cases, felt public shame and judgment. Think about some of the women in the Old Testament and the way that they experienced grief and sought God's face to provide them with a child. Children were viewed as a source of security for aging parents. They were there for both practical labor, but also to be caretakers in old age. I don't know if that's necessarily the case that we see it as in many instances now. But in this culture, children were going to be there to shoulder the labor as their parents aged and take care of their parents when they could no longer care for themselves. Without children, Zachariah and Elizabeth are likely quite anxious about their future. They're aging and have nobody to care for them. As a priest, Zachariah probably had additional societal pressure. Maybe you've thought of this before, but priests, leaders in a church, leaders in a ministry, are oftentimes expected to be closer to God than the people in the pews. And this was the incident here. Zachariah is a priest. He should be one who has God's favor and God's blessing. And because he doesn't have a child, he probably endured quite a bit of credibility attack because he did not have God's favor and God was divinely punishing him. They likely endured decades of hope followed by disappointment, as each year passing made it less likely they would ever have children. Their barrenness probably tested their faith. Yet verse 6 says something really encouraging about them. They were both righteous before God. Despite them not getting their wishes fulfilled, despite their sorrow, despite the attacks leveled against their character, they continued their righteousness before God, walking in His commandments and His ordinances blamelessly. Praise the Lord for that. Max Lucado said, faith is not the belief that God will do what you want. It is the belief that God will do what is right. Zechariah and Elizabeth's story reminds us that God's timing is perfect, even when it is painfully delayed. God chose this couple for an extraordinary job. When we look at, we already did verses 5 through 7. Let's look at 8 through 10 a little bit here. It came to pass that while he executed the priest's office before God in the order of his course, according to the custom of the priest's office, his lot was to burn incense when he went into the temple of the Lord. And the whole multitude of the people were praying without at the time of incense. Now, why does God choose this couple to do these things for him? Why does God choose them to be the parent of this forerunner in John the Baptist? A little bit to continue to think about when we look at those verses. Again, they're described as righteous before God, living and walking blamelessly in His commandments. They were faithful to God. It is those years of faithfulness that often are needed to qualify us from a character perspective to be God's anointed vessels to perform very special tasks. Their barrenness and advanced age ensured that the birth of their child was going to be seen as a miraculous act of God. No one was going to believe that this just happened naturally. I saw that the record holders, let me make sure I'm not misquoting this here, because I was like, wow, that's interesting. Yeah, 2019, September 2019, we had a new world record for the age of parents. The Ratmi Mangama and Sitarama Rajaro from India. They had their children, twin girls, when he was 82 and she was 73. For those of you who are in that age range, could you imagine starting over? Now, we're seeing cases like that a little bit more due to advances in science, particularly in this case. This was made possible through in vitro fertilization. That was not at play in the days of Zechariah and Elizabeth. This was truly a miraculous act of God that mankind could have no intervention with. So clearly God was going to get the glory on the birth of this child. There was no room for human boasting. Zechariah had direct access to the temple. He could communicate God's message. His priestly role also symbolize an interesting connection between the Old Testament and the New Testament, preparing the way for Messiah. In verse 10, it's interesting that we have this multitude of people who are praying outside of the temple while Zacharias is about his work. They're praying while he's performing his priestly duty. They're anticipating something spiritual. God's timing aligned with this moment to show that John's birth was part of his plan to fulfill those prayers. John's birth to this couple reinforced his prophetic mission. His parents' faith and obedience created a foundation for raising a child who would boldly proclaim the coming of Christ. Research studies in the United States over the last couple of years have found that 72% of believers agree that God uses ordinary people to accomplish extraordinary purposes. Interesting, it's only 72%. Zechariah and Elizabeth's story exemplifies this truth. They had strong character, but they were not nobles. They were not of extreme wealth. Yet God used their character ultimately to bring about one of the most significant creatures and actors in the story of the New Testament. Now, we have an angel who makes an appearance in verses 11 through 20. There appeared unto him an angel of the Lord standing on the right side of the altar of incense. When Zacharias saw him, what is he? Troubled. A lot of people who experience face-to-face interaction with an angel are not super comfortable with it. If you see some of the descriptions of angels, particularly in the Old Testament, the book of the Revelation, that's some scary-looking stuff. Sometimes they appear in a more normal manifestation. This angel just appears before the altar of incense. Now recognize, not just anyone could walk into the temple. So here's Zechariah performing his duty, and someone appears in that silent place with very few occupants. Undoubtedly, it startled him. But the angel, having the ability to do so without being smote down by God, emphasized his divine authority and holiness. Zechariah is afraid. It's a common response. It underscores the angel-inspired awe and majesty. In verse 13, the angel delivers a very clear and specific message. Your prayer has been heard. I bet at this point Zechariah was thinking it was over. But the angel is saying that God has heard your prayer, and he brings words of hope and fulfillment. In verses 14 through 17, the angel doesn't just announce the birth of a son, but also he outlines what John's unique purpose is going to be, to prepare the way for the Lord and turn hearts back to God. Now, Zechariah has doubts, for certain. In verse 19, he's given some doubts, and the angel asserts his authority and says, I am Gabriel, who stands in the presence of God. Why do I feel like that's going to come up at some point in about 10 years when I'm trying to ground my son? This statement is both a rebuke and a reminder of Gabriel's close proximity to God and the weight of his words. Gabriel ultimately imposes silence on Zechariah. Zechariah, you are not going to be able to speak until the prophecy has been fulfilled, not as a punishment, but as a sign of God's power and a tool for reflection. I want you to be honest tonight, ladies. How many of you would like God to hear your prayer and strike your husband with silence for a period of time? None? All right. There's a few out there, being honest. Picture a royal ambassador walking into a courtroom. The ambassador's presence commands respect not because of who they are, because of the king they represent. Gabriel, standing in the presence of God and now in the presence of Zechariah, reflects God's majesty and authority. I want to give you a question to discuss here. I want you to look in verses 18 through 22 a little more closely. Okay? I'll read them for you here and give you the question I'm going to want you to discuss. What I want you to discuss here is, do you find yourself sympathetic of Zechariah's position or critical? In other words, do you see where Zechariah is coming from, or do you think he's missing the boat? Let me read these verses, then we'll take 2 minutes to discuss. And Zechariah said unto the angel, Whereby shall I know this? For I am an old man, and my wife well stricken in years. And the angel answering said unto him, I am Gabriel, that stand in the presence of God, and am sent to speak unto thee, and to show thee these glad tidings. Behold, thou shalt be dumb. Some women already think their husband have been struck with that. And not able to speak until the day that these things shall be performed, because thou believest not my words, which shall be fulfilled in their season. And the people waited for Zacharias, and marveled that he tarried so long in the temple. When he came out, he could not speak unto them. And they perceived that he had seen a vision in the temple, for he beckoned unto them, and remained speechless. 2 minutes on the clock. What you discuss? Do you sympathize with Zacharias' position of unbelief? Or do you find yourself critical of how he felt toward the angel's announcement? 2 minutes, let's go. When we look at verses 21 through 22, can you imagine what the experience is like for those praying outside the temple when Zechariah emerges? He's been in there for longer than usual, and now he appears. They were waiting on him to finish this ritual of offering incense, and let's be honest, burning incense does not take a terribly long time. His delay heightened their curiosity. He was only supposed to be in there very briefly, so they had this anticipation that something was going on. And when Zechariah finally emerges, he is unable to speak. And the people perceive that he has seen a vision. He's seen something. He can't explain himself verbally, but he's making gestures with his hands as best he could. This is mysterious, and the divine nature of what happened is unclear to them because he cannot explain it. These people likely have a bit of a mixture of awe and confusion. They are seeing evidence that Zacharias had a divine encounter inside the temple, but they have no idea of the details. This moment underscores the sacredness and mystery of God's interaction with humanity. Imagine if you are waiting with a friend or a loved one at a doctor's office, and you're expecting for them to come back out with routine news, but there's a delay, and there's waiting, and more waiting, and it's well past the acceptable time. And when they walk out, they're visibly changed, and they're unable to even form words and speak to you. It gives you kind of a glimpse as to how that crowd must have felt when Zechariah reappeared. One person said, when God reveals himself, it often leaves us speechless because his ways are higher than ours. Zechariah's silence becomes a symbol of reverence for the divine encounter. I'm going to ask you a question based upon verses 24 and 25. What happens after verse 23? Zechariah finishes his time at the temple and he goes home. Verse 24, after those days, his wife Elizabeth conceived, and she did the normal thing, hid herself 5 months. This is what she says, thus hath the Lord dealt with me in the days wherein he looked on me, to take away my reproach among men. You may have a different translation or some different notes in there, but I want you as a group to consider this question. What kind of emotions do you think Elizabeth is having during this time? What kind of, now mind, she's not there for the announcement. Mary got that visit. Joseph gets that visit. Zacharias gets that visit. Elizabeth, we have no recorded visit. What do you think her emotions are like during this time in which, after all these years, she finds herself expecting at this age, and as this change in what's going on with her husband's inability to communicate with her? 2 minutes, let's discuss as a group. What do you think her emotions are like at this time? Let's go. Join me toward the back of that chapter. I want to see some of the conclusion of the matter here. Verse 57, now Elizabeth's full time came that she should be delivered, and she brought forth a son. And her neighbors and her cousins heard how the Lord had showed great mercy upon her, and they rejoiced with her. It's interesting, right? Her cousins heard how the Lord had shown great mercy upon her. Now, I know that John's going back and forth between some narratives, but she has a pretty famous cousin in the person of Mary, who also is going to experience some miraculous baby news. Not because she's too old to have one. She hasn't met the requirements to have one. And Almighty God is certainly going to use his work through Elizabeth to both encourage her and to embolden her as she proceeds. It's interesting then, as it came to pass, verse 59, that on the 8th day they came to circumcise the child. That was custom for the Jewish people, that they would come together, circumcise the child, and would publicly declare his name. Don't ask me what they called him the first 7 days. I don't know. And then they called him Zacharias, after the name of his father. Kind of makes sense. This is their only child, their firstborn son. We're going to name him Zach Jr. And his mother answered and said, not so, but he shall be called John. And they said to her, you don't have any family to name that child after that's got the name of John. Verse 62, they made signs to his father. What do you want to call him? Surely you want a junior. Verse 63, he asked for a writing tablet and wrote and said, his name is John. and they marveled. Verse 64, and his mouth was opened immediately, and his tongue loosed. And what did he do? He spake and praised God. And fear came on all that dwelt round about them, and all these sayings were noised abroad throughout all the hill country of Judea. And all they that heard them laid them up in their hearts, saying, what manner of child shall this be? And the hand of the Lord was with him. It's apparent that God uses this initial encounter at the beginning of the Christmas story, taking place many months prior, in preparing the hearts of the people for the coming of the Messiah. He's got their attention for certain, and he's going to catch it in an even bolder way shortly after. I want to give us a parting question to consider. 2 minutes again on the clock. We've looked at this account of John the Baptist through Zacharias and Elizabeth and the people around. I want you to reflect on the kind of God that you have seen in this chapter. What is God telling you about how to approach a discouraging situation that you're facing or that you see in the world? This was an amazing situation and a life change. Zacharias loses his ability to speak for likely up to a year. Elizabeth has got a shocking situation that would be very difficult to explain in her world and in society, yet they handle it with a certain level of faith and grace that God had seen in them, making them capable for the situation. Based upon that, what is God telling you about how to approach such an alarming or discouraging situation that you may see? 2 minutes, let's discuss what do we see about God and how he expects us to handle the unexpected. 2 minutes, let's go. We have our monthly business meeting coming up in just a few minutes after the service, so for those who can stay, please do so. I anticipate it will not be a very lengthy one, but one that we must account for as a church body. So I'm praying for you as you go throughout this week. May God use you to shine his light in the darkness and to be prepared to demonstrate faithfulness and grace in whatever comes at you. Let's stand to be dismissed in a word of prayer. Brother Nathan, I will ask you to close us in a word of prayer, and I will encourage all of you that if Joe says he wants to show you some new creation, run. All right? Brother Nathan, close us out.